Welcome everyone to the first episode of this currently unnamed podcast. Right now, we'll go with the last saga with Parvision, and today we'll be covering the legendary chapter 1054. For any new listeners, I'm a newer One Piece YouTuber who primarily makes theories. My current favorite one is the Wano Civil War theory around the Amatsuki clan, but I love doing chapter reactions every week, and to make it easier and by popular demand, I decided to move my chapter reactions to a podcast format. I'm looking forward to giving my thoughts to the newest chapters with you all until the end of One Piece. Before we get into the chapter, I do want to say if you want to get more connected with me, check the links to my Discord or Twitch or YouTube where I do live reactions to the latest chapters and plenty more One Piece related content. So if you're new to my streams, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the Parvision. So getting into chapter 1054, well before all that, the new cover spread with the 4 emperors is wallpaper worthy for sure. But so going into the chapter itself, it's titled Flame Emperor, and we start off with the chapter with the 9 scabbards holding off Aramaki, which was not something I would have expected to be honest. I'm curious to know how they even were alerted by this admiral showing up when no one else seems to know about this situation. But they seem to recognize that Aramaki is a marine, which is a pirate's enemy, and then we got a huge info dump and we're given very interesting insight on Aramaki. So he starts off just kind of shouting at them about how the celestial dragons are gods. To me, this was really random and kind of unprompted. No one really asked, but also I was not expecting him to sound like Rob Lucci. I have to go back in the manga and confirm this, but this seems like a take that someone within Cypher Pol would have, not really an admiral that we know of. So far, none of the admirals have shown this kind of reverence to the celestial dragons. Even Sakazuki, who seemed to be Aramaki's role model or big brother figure, wouldn't have ever said something like this. If anything, it feels like Sakazuki hates the celestial dragons, or at least doesn't agree with some of the directives he's been given by them. And so, moving on with the chapter, because I'll talk about Green Bull more once I get through more of this portrayal, we get a huge confirmation that Aramaki does in fact have a Logia fruit named the Forest fruit, and in my videos I did say this felt like the least likely option, but only because most of the options that would have made this make sense kind of muddies the Logia class of fruits. In this panel debuting his fruit, we even see it looks kind of like his hair lights on fire when he goes full monster mode. This low-key kind of reminded me of Nika's hair when Luffy awakened, so there is a world where this is a special Logia class or something, given the onset of special Paramecia's and now Luffy's fruit. I mean, in general, the Forest God fruit theory stocks go up tremendously with this Forest fruit power debut. It was funny because I had 2 back-to-back videos about Robin and Caribou. The Robin video was saying her fruit was called the flower fruit or the Hana no Mi, but she sprouts hands, and we see Aramaki with the Forest fruit and he's still sprouting hands like Robin was doing. Then the other part with Caribou's video was pointing out how interesting the swamp fruit is as a Logia and how it kind of breaks the mold of the Logia class of fruits. And now with the forest fruit that Aramaki has, it has a very similar feeling as Caribou's fruit. Aramaki goes on saying, "My Logia power is nature incarnate, a source of life that rivals the sea." Now this line is really interesting to me because we know the energy of the sea is a huge component to the story in that it weakens devil fruit users. So now I'm wondering if the life of the forest may have a similar impact on groups of people, or maybe it empowers people? But it doesn't really seem like Aramaki is on the side of empowering people because of his next lines. Now I know there's a lot of harsh responses to the next few lines. I had a similar reaction too. Truthfully, I want to wait until the official translations to get a better, more clear understanding of Aramaki's character, but he goes on to say humanity only got this far by enforcing hierarchies, and his agenda is to put non-affiliated nations in their place below the gods, the celestial dragons. That's what keeps life going. So him talking about life is very interesting. Maybe his justice is like food chain justice or something. I know nature or life justice could make sense, but like he is all about hierarchies, and it seems like he wants to enforce the food chain rather than all of nature itself. Then he says this visceral line, "Prejudice breeds stability." Now this line, the way I'm reading it is, bias is natural, meaning that if everyone is equal then there is no power or control, which is an unstable system from his perspective. It might make sense that his justice is biased justice. Now if he were saying this to Fishman, then it'd probably be taken more like racism justice, but he's speaking to people on Wano, and his main distinction for the discrimination is that they are not affiliated with the world government, and they are also not celestial dragons. So these people are 2 notches down on the food chain in Aramaki's eyes. And the biased justice seems to be even more enforced here when he says no laws would be broken if you all died here. He has to know that it's a crime to kill people, but because he is biased, he doesn't consider it a crime. Again, this is the perspective that I tied to the Cypher Pol agents rather than the Navy. And Aramaki goes on to say he'd butcher thousands of people to get to Luffy. Now, this is an interesting line because we all kind of expected this kind of mentality from him, but not even Sakazuki was this savage. He did something like this at Ohara, but only because of how high the stakes were of letting loose the demons of Ohara. They were innocent, but there was a chance one person tainted them all. In this case, Aramaki is fine with just butchering thousands of innocent people to get to his goal, which even Sakazuki at Marineford was kind of hesitating about. But ultimately, the people he was willing to sacrifice were Marines who were willing to be sacrificed by becoming Marines in the first place, not innocent civilians. But then the chapter moves from Aramaki's focus to Yamato and Momo, which is crazy because I didn't expect either of them to be here. Well, Oda didn't draw them confronting Aramaki in the first place, but Yamato lays down the law with a conqueror's blow smack across Aramaki's Logia face into the ground and had him say that it hurt. The next series of events almost guarantees that Yamato is gonna get an absurd bounty. She tells Aramaki for some reason that they are Kaido's son, which probably confused Aramaki, but it's interesting that Yamato didn't just say that they were Odin like they usually would for an introduction, so maybe this is some interesting character development. But what's even crazier is the next panel. Momo steps up and has a Boro Blast Breath. I was like, in just 7 days, Momo learned Boro Breath. Momo stocks went way up. Then I went to the next panel and I was like, this is much better. This makes way more sense. There's no way Oda would have Momo Boro Blast an Admiral. But nonetheless, this is an awesome panel with Momo in dragon form, squaring off with an admiral. Momo gets a whole dialogue about how he vowed to protect Wano and then even bites Aramaki. Momo gets wrapped up, and though he looks like he's in a bad situation, he tells no one, especially Yamato, to not interfere. Now, there was a lot I want to talk about with this. This is an incredible showing with Momo. This really gives development for Momo's cowardice, where he would normally be terrified to confront danger, but now is running head first to protect his constituents. If there was ever a doubt about Momo's conqueror potential, I think this bodes well for that potential development in the future. But so before moving on to the next section, I do want to talk a little bit more on the Aramaki part. I do want to see more of Aramaki before making any long-lasting determinations. I also will be waiting for the official translations to see if some of the dialogue changes. That's something I'm going to think about when it comes to these chapter reactions. For some chapters like this one, there will be a lot of benefit to waiting for the official translations to get a better comprehensive understanding of what is being said. But at this point, I feel like my whole image of Aramaki has changed. If you're from my channel, I had a theory that Aramaki might have been a really powerful bounty hunter prior to the Navy draft that ultimately led him to the Navy as an admiral during the time skip. But given this dialogue, I think that option is diminishing severely. Most of what he has said so far makes him feel like he was an orphan that was indoctrinated into the world government supremacy at a young age like Rob Lucci was. Now my head is leaning towards the idea that Aramaki is more closely tied to the Celestial Dragons or Cypher Pol than I would have ever guessed prior to this chapter. We may find out that Aramaki was drafted from the world government, which is a significant detail that I'll touch on later on in this chapter analysis. So all that being said, the most hype thing came next in this chapter. I was in complete disbelief during my live reaction. All I needed to see was the ship to lose my grip on reality. I literally paused, got up, noted the date and time, and pinched myself to make sure this wasn't a dream. But yeah, it was real. Shanks was in chapter 1054, and I asked my stream to get confirmation of my bias, but it kind of feels like the way things were given to us, it's trending that we might actually start seeing Shanks more often in the chapters. And so 80% of my live viewership agreed that we'd probably be seeing more Shanks in the upcoming chapters. I wonder if that sentiment will change as people let the chapter settle in a little bit more. At first I was like, oh, maybe Oda is just teasing, like it's just Shanks' ship, not him. But nope, Shanks' silhouette was right in the next strip of panels. The next part is, if you have been watching my theory videos recently, you know that during the break month, I was reviewing old chapters, especially chapter 1, heavily. So it was on site when it came to seeing anything related to Shanks. The feeling when Shanks' crew said Luffy's become a great pirate now, I just had flashbacks and low-key tears because Oda is saying we're going to the last saga and endgame of One Piece, and that recognition is the loop from chapter 1, where Shanks says to return the hat when Luffy becomes a great pirate. It's finally now at chapter 1054 when we get this awesome feeling. At any moment they could meet and shake the world, even our world. I feel like the moment Shanks and Luffy meets, all the readers are gonna shout and stomp so loudly it'll be heard around the world. Maybe even loud enough for Oda to hear it at the minimum. But anyways, there were so many lines during this Shanks part of the chapter that needed to be highlighted, so I'm gonna go through some of them. I mean, the one that made me the most upset, and getting this one out of the way, was Yasopp. I facepalmed so hard when I read this line. Yasopp really out here representing the deadbeat dad's crew. But then there's the next page. Shanks is looking at the newspaper with Luffy's new bounty, and not just that, his appearance. And what's interesting to me is that Oda didn't have Shanks any bit surprised by Luffy's appearance. I feel like if we saw Shirahoshi, Rebecca, Vivi, Kobe, anyone really reacting to this bounty picture, they'd be like, wait, is that Luffy? What happened? Why does he look like this? And Shanks was like, nah, it's about time. But then we get the Shanks flashback when the fruit was stolen in the first place. Another loop from chapter 1. Shanks' crew was seen raiding CP9's ship, and Who's Who is on it. And we see this legendary panel of Shanks wearing the straw hat. That looks so cool, and I wish I had this panel for my recent straw hat theory about the hat's significance. But that being said, we get the confirmation that I felt all along, which was that CP9 and the world government had no clue about the Gomu Gomu fruit that they were transporting. They knew it was the Gomu Gomu, but even the CP9 were left in the dark about its significance. And this could mean either the Gorosei knew and decided to withhold this info from CP9, or that they had no clue at the time. This is something we still need some clarity about, because the Gorosei's revelation during Onigashima War about the true nature of the Gomu Gomu no Mi seemed interesting to say the least. Maybe they're just senile old geezers. But so leaving that part of the flashback, we see where chapter 1 would essentially pick up, with slightly new focuses. We see Luffy partying with Shanks' crew, but he has a new shirt that some people believe look like the Gomu Gomu no Mi upside down, but my focus was that it says Ba and has a musical note. And by the time of recording this, I didn't go deeper to see if there was meaning behind it, but you know, with the drums of liberation, I'm sure it's related to Nika somehow. Then we see Shanks and Luffy on the coast talking, and Luffy is demonstrating to us that apparently he could read a newspaper at that age, which was a huge surprise to me, I'm not gonna lie. When I was live reacting, I was like, wait, Luffy can read? Who taught him? But jokes aside, if the anime is gonna expand on this scene in a canon fashion, I imagine with something like that, we may even get a full episode expansion on this Shanks stuff, so I'm super excited for that. And then moving on, we see some of Shanks' lackeys talking about the legend of Luffy. Oda has his classic meme situation where they're like, whoa, Shanks knew the Straw Hat Luffy, which is hilarious. It low-key feels like the way Shanks and Buggy on Roger's crew would probably talk about Whitebeard and Shiki, and then they say Luffy is rumored to be like a rampaging demon monkey, which isn't really that false, but it's so out of pocket that Oda had a random demon monkey looking monkey mink say that about Luffy of all people. I had a pretty solid good laugh about that, that's for sure. But then we get the most, well, maybe not the most controversial thing about this chapter, because it wouldn't be a great chapter without some controversy. But Shanks is pulling a Zunisha, it seems. Despite being shown literally at Wano, Shanks says he's not here to have a reunion with Luffy, and brings up what happened on his territory, referencing the cover story where Bartolomeo and his crew burned down Shanks' flag and replaced it with Luffy's. And Shanks says we'd be failing our duties if we just let that slide. But then he sits down with Ben Beckman, pours out a cup of sake, and says a very controversial line. I say controversial for many reasons at this moment. But he says, hey Beck, isn't it about time to go and claim it? The One Piece? And I know I lagged when I read that. I paused, jaw dropped, and I can't imagine what you or everyone else was like. But I was like, huh? And what took me by surprise is the casualness of this dialogue. He said, claim it. To me, it sounds like he knows what it is, where it is, how it is, who it is, everything about it. And he's just gonna go to the bodega on the corner to grab it. And this is where the official translations will be important. I've heard from a few places now that it might be more proper to say that Shanks actually said, isn't it about time that the One Piece is claimed? Meaning not necessarily him, and rather more like One Piece's time to be relevant is now. Like how Roger said he was too early, Shanks is now saying now's the time. And now I want to use this full scene to give an alternative understanding to what Shanks meant by, I'm not planning to have a reunion with Luffy here. I'm not saying that this is what's gonna happen, but it could be that Shanks is planning on going to Wano and confronting Luffy. Instead, he might mean because of what Barto did, their first priority is to ascertain Luffy's position towards Shanks. This also doesn't mean that he wants to fight Luffy, but there might be a double meaning behind these words. Maybe he means to ask Luffy if he truly wants to take the responsibility of an emperor. That territory might have been important to Shanks, similar to how Whitebeard has his own territories that he was funding and protecting. So Shanks might want to test Luffy's ability to protect the territory against him. I'm saying this more so to open up the possibilities of what might come from this chapter. It's all so interesting. I personally can't wait for the official translations to drop, and seeing Greisch's digital coloration of this Shanks scene was incredible as well. That being said, the chapter is not over. This chapter truly felt so packed and amazing to get after a 1-month break. And the world we go to now is the Navy headquarters in the New World, which by the way also has a Japanese styled castle, but also has a Colosseum amphitheater design surrounding it, which if you've seen the Hidden Islands Rome Piece video and my Amatsuki catfish theory, you know why that's significant. But staying on the chapter, we get the confirmation right from the get that the Revolutionary Army seem to have succeeded at the Reverie, and Sabo is being dubbed the Flame Emperor, which is amazing. Most of what happens next was predicted. I was very confident that Cobra was going to be dead, the basic reasoning just being that he was planning on going to the Gorosei and asking about the Void Century. He wanted to know about the Poneglyphs and his ancestors that chose to not join the other 20 kings in the Holy Land, and little to Cobra's knowledge, the Gorosei believed Cobra's ancestor to be a traitor. So given how sensitive we've seen the Gorosei around anything related to the Void Century, it was a simple deduction that he would be dead, and that would also implicate Vivi's standing, which we saw later in the chapter that she was declared missing. Which is an interesting choice of words, which I'll get into later. There's so much to discuss here with these last few pages, so to run through some of the events here, it was said that Sabo assassinated King Cobra, and a few hours before that, Sabo attacked the homes of the Celestial Dragons and destroyed a monument of the Divine Dragon Claw, which is the symbol of the world nobles and was a declaration of war. And this to me felt like a blatant parallel to Enies Lobby. The Revolutionary Army did what the Straw Hats did, just on a much grander scale, but not just that. They were against two admirals, Fujitora and Ryokugu, and somehow Sabo and the revolutionary commanders also freed Kuma and escaped. Now, it was said that the admirals were at a disadvantage because they were fighting in the Holy Land and couldn't risk the Celestial Dragons' lives, but also the Navy has no jurisdiction there. The God Knights have power there. And so at this point, I want to take a quick detour pause here. I think this chapter is doing an interesting thing. In my live reaction, I voiced my concern of the developments here, and it stemmed from the introduction of Kuroma, or Tensei, the Navy Criminal Affairs Unit Chief. And so Kuroma means Black Horse, which signifies that this is yet another character within the Navy that was an admiral candidate, similar to Garp, Pink Rabbit, and Brown Pig. I won't go into the connection to the Zodiac right now, but the important thing is the Navy Criminal Affairs Unit Chief. This seems to be yet another faction within the world government that may be significant. This unit is investigating Cobra's death and Vivi's disappearance, and Sabo's connection to it all. This actually is a really interesting development. So we know that the Navy and the world government are separate entities. The world government gives the Marines their power of the world, but the world government is the controlling power with their own forces as well. We already have the dichotomy with the CP0 and Sword. CP0 is also called Aegis, which means shield, and and they are the Gorosei's personal elite unit of spies, essentially. SWORD seems to be a Marine secret organization, and just having the sword and shield juxtaposition shows how the two grouped entities may be at odds later on. Now, we see that the Navy also has their own version of Cypher Pol, essentially, that it's supposed to investigate crimes like what Sabo did. But as they mentioned, the Holy Land is not their jurisdiction, which makes this feel like the classic NCIS or FBI or CIA cover-up story, where one investigation group is denied clearance because the truth of the situation is being covered up by another investigation group, a faction that should be on the same side, but each side has their own agenda that they're trying to push. Kind of like how a CIA investigation could ruin an FBI sting operation because of the mess of having multiple undercover agents who are deep into their relative organizations. We low-key already saw that with Drake and CP0 on Onigashima, and Drake and Kizaru on Sabaody. But that being said, in this situation, I think this is super relevant to the Sabo situation. I don't think Sabo killed Cobra. It definitely feels like he was framed, and the Gorosei were the ones who killed Cobra and blamed it on Sabo. I don't think the battle between the revolutionaries and the admirals was straightforward at all. Sabo and Fujitora already have a rapport with each other, and Fujitora seems to be able to sense the good nature of people. Given they were saving Kuma, who was enslaved, there's already too many factors that give Fujitora a reason to not use his full force against Sabo. And what's important here is that I think Black Horse, if given the chance, might end up uncovering that Cobra was killed by the Gorosei instead of Sabo, which will further drive a stake into the possible civil war, for lack of better words, that might occur between the Navy and the world government. Luffy already has so many powerful allies within the Navy too. In general, I think this chapter added a lot of complex elements to the last saga story. And we'll talk more about it in a second, but in the last page or double spread, we see one of the coolest situations ever. So if you heard my conversation in the first week of the break month with Sai, a YouTuber who covers the latest One Piece updates, the understanding that came out of chapter 1053 was that Sabo was essentially Sun God Nika, the warrior of liberation to all the nations affected by the Revolutionary Army. And we saw literally that exact feeling here. They were worshipping him like a god. Luffy was dubbed an Emperor of the Sea, and Sabo is dubbed the Flame Emperor, the champion of the people. The chapter ends with Akainu claiming that he's gonna fight back and return fire on all fronts, which is scary, but with what is the question, right? The admirals are dispatched and they're spread thin, and so besides the SSG, we're not sure what Akainu means by this statement. Like, is he finally gonna take action himself? But that being said, I do want to talk a lot more when it comes to Sabo, now that we finished this chapter through and through. So one major note was that Kuroma, Black Horse, said that there were 8 rebelling kingdoms that were inspired to stage their revolutionary coups while their kings were still returning home. That means that the Revolutionary Army, while their commanders and dragon was tied up, all had successful coups during the Reverie. That is incredible. So now I wonder what 8 kingdoms were taken over, and I wonder if we can figure out who those nations were. Because imagine being a king and going to the Reverie and then coming back and then your whole nation is just gone, like you're not the king anymore. That's kind of crazy. But between Sabo's kingdoms and Luffy's kingdoms, there's definitely a force to be reckoned with now. We are definitely getting into the last war territory. And so with all that being said, I was thinking and looking to see if there were any clues about the kingdoms that Sabo liberated. And what's really cool and interesting is in the last panel with Sabo, we see these flags and banners hanging on the altar. So from left to right, we see the Revolutionary Army flag, then we see the world government flag with an arrow through it. I wonder if that's significant. Then we see Sabo's flag with a cross in it. And then we see a Shimotsuki flag. And that's not it. We see a criminal flag from Papagu's clothing line. He seems to be sponsoring the Revolutionary Army activities probably. And then we see the Marine flags, but upside down. The coloration of the flags are interesting, but this was a crazy awesome detail. Like the Shimotsuki flag being shown here like this really adds on to the whole Kozuburo and Shimotsuki village relation to the dragon idea. I imagine that Kozuburo could have been creating the weapons for the Revolutionary Army. There's honestly so much to talk about when it comes to this chapter. I haven't touched on Sabo's goggles yet and its importance, but I don't need to. If you haven't heard of the One Piece creator Marshall D. Preach on YouTube, he has an incredible video about Sabo's hat and its importance. And just to give it even more significance, he remade this video this month before this chapter, and the original video was from last year, where he said that Sabo not only will become, but already was the face of the revolutionaries. And he predicted we'd essentially see this panel where he would be praised like a god. And so I talked to him about some additional details that I might have found that give this theory and analysis even more credence, and so we will talk more about it on my next Voice of All Things stream next weekend. Yes, me and Marshall D. Preach will be collabing in the near future, and I'm excited because we'll be talking about the revolutionaries, Marines, and the world government. So saving that conversation for a later time, something I do want to talk about here is what is possible for the revolutionaries as an outcome of what we were told here. An important detail we were told was that the Arabasta ship had not left port, so that implies no one who came with them went home yet, or at least not in the traditional route. We know Vivi at the minimum is missing, and missing is a very interesting word. I would imagine if they knew she was with Sabo, then they would have said Sabo also kidnapped Vivi to further demonize the revolutionaries, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, that doesn't mean Vivi isn't with Sabo. It could be that Vivi was hidden from the world government entirely, because I would imagine with my line of thinking that Cobra was killed by the Gorosei, then this entire situation might parallel Robin's storyline. We already have the Enies Lobby parallel, and Cobra being Vivi's dad adds another slight parallel, because Clover was very much a father figure to Robin, and was killed right in front of her. But that being said, both Robin and Vivi have great importance to the world government. We saw that Emu was carrying Vivi's picture beforehand, and we don't know why. And I strongly believe that Vivi has some grand power hidden within her. At the moment, the best thing I can reach for is that she is Uranus, or is related to Uranus, and she can control the weather, as it was sort of shown in chapter 210. Now, what's really important about this possible parallel is that I had mentioned to Randy Troy in our Theory for Theory episode together, I said that Arabasta might get Buster called, or put in a similar situation as Ohara. What is important about that is the world government invaded Ohara to confirm the poneglyph's presence. What's interesting to us is that we actually don't know what was said on that poneglyph, but Robin does. So we kind of assume that either we already know through subtle hints on what was said on it, or Robin might tell us later on. But that being said, Arabasta has their own poneglyph, and what's significant about that is that if the world government takes that poneglyph and they're able to read it somehow, then they know where Pluton is. And as Robin told us, that poneglyph says Pluton is on Wano, which is an incredibly important update for the world government's focus. And so with all that being said, similar to Robin, Vivi is now on the run, disappearing just like Robin had to. If it's the full parallel, then maybe an admiral helped her, just like how Aokiji saved Robin. Maybe Fujitora saved Vivi somehow and is just not being told yet. But so ascertaining where Vivi could possibly be will be important to predicting the future storyline with the Straw Hats. So I want to lay out a few possibilities. An option for Vivi to escape with Sabo, with the world government's knowledge, but without them knowing it's actually Vivi with Sabo, ties to another really important storyline. This is possible because there is one character at the Reverie that is probably the biggest unknown mystery variable left in One Piece, and that is Jewelry Bonnie. She disguised herself as the Queen of Sorbet Kingdom, which by the way is Kuma's kingdom, and she has the power to age and de-age people, so she could have done that to Vivi to masquerade her escape. It would make sense that if Sabo saved Kuma, that Bonnie might be involved here possibly, now becoming an ally of the Revolutionary Army, for the moments at least. Which could also mean that a possible escape route is to Sorbet Kingdom, which is in the South Blue, and is on the wrong side of the world that we're on, which is important. When we're talking about possible ways to escape for the revolutionaries, we have to take into account that they did not come to the Holy Land on their own ships. They disguised themselves and infiltrated through various royal ships. And it would be hilarious if they left on the Goa Kingdom ship that Sabo was on, threatening his little brother Stelly, the king, about taking him back. But I don't know if that makes sense for the revolutionaries and Vivi to end up somewhere in the first half of the Grand Line, or in the East Blue or South Blue, because that'd be so far removed from where the Straw Hats threats currently are, which also eliminates Drum Island as a possibility too, because Dr. Kureha could have been a potential ally. She doesn't seem to care at all about the world government, as she wore a Chopper bounty shirt to the Reverie. But that being said, we also know that Fishman Island, the quickest place to escape to since it's just below the Holy Land, was probably not the escape location, because we saw that after the Reverie, Garp returned with King Neptune and Shirahoshi to protect them and let them know about the updates that we're hearing right now. That being said, there is Rebecca and King Riku, who would be in the New World on Dressrosa, but I doubt Sabo and the Revolutionaries would end up there. I mean, they could be, but before going back to this line of thinking, there is a very important person here, which is Kuma. We are not sure of his current circumstances or the presence of his fruit, but his fruit would be a great explanation for Vivi's disappearance. She could have gone on a vacation alone, and I say vacation because, you know, he was asking, where would you want to go? I'd imagine if Kuma asked where you would want to go to Vivi, she'd say to Luffy, and then boom, we get Vivi landing on Wano with Luffy, and she tells Luffy everything that really happened on Wano, which would be a great way to speed up plot in my opinion. And what's also very important about this is that I haven't done a timeline yet of the events, but Kuma's vacation power transports the person, and apparently regardless of distance, it takes 3 nights and 3 days to travel to that location. So it might line up that Vivi could land on Wano right after the 7-day skip that we saw. And now that I'm thinking about these things, given that Luffy's Vivre card was probably burning up during the Kaido fight, I wonder if that had any implications on Sabo's actions or decisions. Maybe everyone is en route to Wano. I mean, now that we see Shanks there, it's not too much to say that we might see other people coming towards Wano while the Straw Hats are there. And I still haven't exhausted all the creative ways that the revolutionaries themselves could have escaped, but I hope by this point we can all grasp how complex of a situation this Holy Land story is. Even the admirals are a complex variable here, and Kuma's fruit, and now on top of that, we have Morley, and they were on the Red Line. Couldn't Morley just tunnel the entire Red Line and just end up anywhere? And then on top of that, Karasu has flying powers. Bonnie can disguise anyone, and wait, can Bonnie somehow revert Kuma to his original state? Probably not, but then we're also adding the God Knights to the mix. There's so many things going on within this chapter. And we haven't even talked about Shanks in this regard, but we have talked about the One Piece, and the possibility that Wano continues to be a focal point is craziness. Like, where is Dragon right now? Is he gonna show up to Wano? And more importantly, Blackbeard. He said, due to this news that we're reading right now, he said, pack your bags, onto the ship, why let the Navy reap the reward that when I stand to gain from this? So where did Blackbeard go? He saw this news of a death, an assassination attempt, the warlord's abolishment, Vivi's disappearance, and Sabo's involvement with the Revolutionary Army. So what reward is the Navy reaping from any of this? What did Blackbeard see from this news that he thought, I could stand to gain from this? At the moment, Blackbeard is the opportunistic character that he normally is. So is he going to ambush a warlord or maybe take advantage of the chaos in Arabasta? We don't know much of his directive, but I'm more confused about where Blackbeard would end up as a result of this news. But now that we see Shanks in chapter 1054 and the basic news, it definitely feels like we're going to learn about Blackbeard soon, or at the minimum, I'm excited to find out where he is. Especially when you tie in Akainu's response to all of these events, it seems really odd that Blackbeard's perspective is that the Navy could possibly reap the reward on something, when it feels like the Navy took L's across the entire board. And all I know is, though I couldn't talk about everything that came to mind with chapter 1054, I think it's safe to say that chapter 1054 will be a chapter that goes down in history and comes up in future theories and discussions. This chapter has laid out the foundation for the future and end of One Piece. I'll probably talk more about 1054 in my future streams, but I think I got a lot out for this first episode of the podcast that's still not named. But I hope you enjoyed listening to the last saga with me, Parvision. If you enjoyed this time, just know that this is like 1% of me conversing and reacting to One Piece. I use a lot more of my hockey for my YouTube channel and live streams. I move my chapter reactions here so I could do a 30-minute or longer chapter reaction without it hurting my YouTube analytics. analytics. But I have a lot of fun talking about One Piece and making these, so here we are. And if you're a new listener, find my main content on YouTube under the channel name Parvision. I also have a second VODs channel where I upload all my shorts and VODs related to One Piece. I also was at the YouTube Reverie and had a great time conversing with all the really amazing creators. I spent most of my break month talking with other creators on their channels or in streams or podcasts. I just love talking to people and connecting with you all. So join my Discord server if you want to talk more about One Piece, but also keep up to date with all my future videos and collabs. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next Parvision.